Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and this is a final preview of Elden Ring before the game comes out in just a few days. I recently got the chance to play the final or very near final product for 6 hours. I've already made a video going over the starting classes and such, but in this one I'm going to answer some more general questions you guys had in the format of going over some things that I saw during these 6 hours. The footage in this video was provided by Bandai Namco. No capture was available during the preview. Let's start things off. It was the PC version, so I had a look through the graphics options. I won't read them all out, but they are listed on screen here. If you are wondering about performance, I didn't notice any issues during my preview. Whilst I don't want to give you any false hope, I would assume the game is going to run in a comparable way to Shadows Die Twice and Dark Souls 3. But you may need a slightly beefier CPU or higher RAM if I had to guess, as it's got a much larger world. Of course, if you are concerned about system requirements or specs, which are on the Steam page now, then I would suggest waiting for a video from Digital Foundry or another channel like them, who are good at breaking down all those technical aspects. So how about the actual gameplay? Well, the rest of this video will be spoilers. I'm going to try and keep them minor spoilers, just answering things that people have asked me the last week or so. I'll try and avoid talking about anything big. Of course, if you want to go in blind, that's probably the best way to do it. I won't blame you if you stop watching now. Still here? Well, starting Elden Ring gives us a little cinematic that reminded me a bit of the Demon Souls intro in the presentation style, basically giving us a little rundown on the state of the world and what's going on. After this, character creation takes place and I decided to make a samurai, as that was a new class. I was curious to try it out. Moments after loading into the actual game, I came across a boss who obliterated me in a semi-scripted fight. Semi-scripted in that you can beat this boss, I'm sure, but most players aren't going to beat this boss the first time. And it's harder than the Vanguard in Demon Souls, for example, which wasn't really very hard, and then if you beat the Vanguard, the Dragon God punches you out anyway. This starting location was a familiar one too. If you played the network test and saw those large, isolated, pillar-like islands from Stormvale, well, I'm certain that is the starting location. What happens if you defeat this boss and go through the fog gate behind him? I'm not sure. Maybe you get to skip to a location further ahead. Either way, it'll be a much more even fight in New Game Plus. But I'm sure someone's going to find a good way to trounce this guy at base level. The boss had a dangerous AoE shaving ability. I say shaving as it hurt a lot even when blocking. I guess you could call it chip damage too. Dying here moved me to the start of the closed network test, but with an additional cutscene. Dashing my way through the tutorial area just to see if anything had changed. It really hadn't. I then found out how to get through the fog gate that many of you may remember existed in that first area from the closed network test. Stone Sword Keys, I think they were called, which function almost identically to the Pharos Lockstones in Dark Souls 2. Moving through that area led me to a large underground place full of ramps and, well, they were being patrolled by some sort of doom chariot machine which annihilated me if it were to touch me. Navigating through this area, out of curiosity, I ended up fighting a boss at the end of it, with a gross name. Truth be told, I wasted like 20-30 minutes fighting this boss because I was base level, and it felt like maybe I needed to be a little bit higher level, as it had a very large one-hit kill AoE attack. Don't worry though, the boss isn't really a problem, I just wasn't prepared for it at that level. Either way, I then made my way to the perimeter of the network test area to explore what I could only stare at before. This led me across a bridge to the south, where I found a character named, amusingly, Arena of Castle Morn. If you aren't aware, Arena of Karim was an NPC in Dark Souls 3, who was protected by a man named Morn. She gave me a little sub-quest, and then I made my way to Castle Morn, a fun little side area, which I imagine Elden Ring is full of. See, Elden Ring's open world is full of these little dungeons. Some lead underground, other times they're little fortresses or castles, as well as the big main dungeons called Legacy Dungeons, which effectively work like your classic Souls-style dungeon, think Tomb of the Giants, Anor Londo, Drangleic Castles, and whatnot. Castle Morn had its own creepy little story going on, which I won't spoil, but I found some neat items there, including a greatsword that, well, I won't spoil, but do you remember the Iron Throne from Game of Thrones? Think of that. The boss of this area trounced me a few times, but that was largely my fault. It was a little bit like an Artorias or an Abyss Watchers kind of fight. Lanky boss, rapid, jerky movements, lots of jumping, and a greatsword. I was playing without a shield, so I just had to get used to his attack patterns, and he was one or two-shotting me as I didn't really have any points in health yet, so the margin for error was low. But he was pretty fun little boss. After this, I realised how much time I had wasted on that first boss, so I picked up the pace and began moving about more earnestly. At some point, I found a mini lantern that you can put on your belt, a lot like the one in Bloodborne. Unfortunately, I forget exactly where I found it, but man, that was useful. Elden Ring has a lot of dark areas. There's also torches you can equip. Multiple, in fact. You don't really need to equip multiple ones at a time, you just have multiple options. I'm sure you could equip 2 torches at the same time and power stance torches if that's what you want to be in life. I rushed up to Stormvale Castle and went to that one spot where it was obvious there was going to be a path, and of course there was. If you remember in the closed network test, there was this like really obvious room where there's like a wall there, and it's like, no, we're definitely going through there, and yes, we are. So I just generally rushed through this area as I had explored a good deal of it in the closed network test. Of course, we didn't have all of it then. But yeah, I rushed to the boss, made one slight brief detour to open up a stone sword fog gate thingy imp statue, behind which I found a very cool weapon buff incantation. So if you're going for a faith build and you like weapon buffs, well, make sure you have a key for that place. Then I made my way to the boss. The one we've seen in trailers a lot. Was it Godric? The guy who wants us to kneel, basically. Instead of kneeling, I made Shiva of the East proud and made him taste my blade. He was the first big boss I encountered, really, and he seemed to have a nice amount of moves, an interesting phase transition, and a cool area to fight in. Wasn't too easy, wasn't too hard, he felt about right. Now following this, I decided to run around the perimeter of the Outer World map. Instead of trying to just, play as I would normally, I thought I'm going to try and get an idea of the sense of size of the world. And it's not the biggest open world ever. It's really dense though, which is great. If you remember my Metal Gear Solid 5 review from, 5 years ago, probably by now, I talked up a lot in that how the open world is so empty, so pointless, and I hate that. If your open world is effectively a loading screen that you run through when you get from Fortress A to Fortress B, what's the point? In Elden Ring, though, I had a lot of fun exploring. There's always something on the horizon or in the distance that you want to go and check out, and there's usually something interesting there. Sometimes there's some nice surprises there, or a terrifying surprise. I found a lot of things that I briefly looked at or explored a little more thoroughly, but I won't touch on most of those as that would ruin the fun. After running north, I went east and south. After trying to get into a very interesting area in the kind of northeast of the map, I didn't make it in there because there was a boss there, and I punched this boss like once and I saw that it had so much health. Clearly you're meant to have an upgraded weapon, be high level, so I just had a look at the boss, and then I bounced out of there. And down to the sort of, southeast side, I found a particular enemy that gave me a bit of a what moment. Purely due to its size, it was very, very big. I ended up my journey exploring a castle that was heavily fortified and defended. I used the cliffs to get behind it, which I believe is the intended way to get in, as the main gate, well, you don't want to go in that way. During all these ventures, I was invaded once by an NPC in the open world, which confused me because I wondered why my horse vanished. I'm sure there are more invasions in the open world, by the way, but I was moving at such a pace that I probably just kind of, skipped a lot of them. Especially as I was mostly running around the edge of the map. But after defeating the first boss, I was able to see a few new mechanics. First up, boss souls. They are in, but with a new name, and work otherwise much the same way. You can turn a boss's remembrances into items, no doubt spells, and so forth. In addition, the hub area of the game is reached by a loading screen, the Round Table Hold. In here, you'll meet various NPCs, including one who wants to, hug you, and a surly blacksmith who has a nice little quest with a new tarnished who just arrived after you. There's no fighting allowed in here, which I'm kind of okay with, because it means, well, this has never happened to me, but I get so many comments from people saying, oh no, I put my controller down and I like R1 smashed this NPC. Well, you don't need to worry about that anymore. I say no fighting allowed, but if you jump down to a lower area in the round table hold, well, that doesn't apply, as I was invaded down there by a guy who almost one-shot me with an insane scythe combo. So I had to pummel him mercilessly. Of course, I expect as you go through the game more NPCs will arrive and others will leave. As for how this area will compare with Firelink Shrine, Medulla, and all those other places, well, time will tell. Whilst I found no covenants, I did find a great rune. This is obtained from the first big boss, then I needed to take it to a special tower to properly claim it. This allowed me to equip it. You can have one great rune equipped at a time, maybe later more, I don't know. But then I needed another item to actually activate the great rune. Think like humanity or embers. I would get the bonus conferred by that rune after using an item to activate it. I'm curious to see what the other great runes from the other bosses are going to give us. Speaking of which, I found a lot of bosses. A lot of them were clearly designed for higher level characters, like the one I mentioned earlier, so I just kind of backed out or let them kill me if it looked like it would take me 20 minutes to do half their health or whatever. Like a classic Souls game, you have a number of big targets to go after, each of which has their own legacy dungeon. That's your kind of primary goal in the game. You know how in Dark Souls it was, oh, go and reclaim the great souls so you can, open the way to Gwyn. This time it's defeat the demigods so you can get the shards of the Elden Ring so you can presumably forge it once again and stick it on your ring and then punch someone real hard. Of course, littered around the overworld map, you will find lesser Erd trees. These are typically guarded by an Erd Tree Guardian. Sometimes there's dungeons in or under the trees, which can have some interesting things to discover. There's also guiding signs in the open world. Not sure how to refer to them, but effectively after interacting with something, a ghostly figure would walk off, and I would follow them, they'd lead me to something interesting. Naturally, I could have found these things by myself, but some of these caves and such are well hidden, and this just helps you find it that you might have missed it otherwise. I even found some NPCs out in the wild, some of whom had little quests for me, and would move about as the quest chain progressed. One guy wanted me to clear out his fortress, so he could take his rightful place there. Of course I obliged. There's also paintings in the world. They depict a certain area, and if you head to the area in the painting, well, who knows what will happen. I think that about covers everything without going into any really big spoilers. There's a few other mechanics that I didn't mention that I mentioned in my closed network test preview, and for those of you asking about poise, I'm sorry, I don't really know how it works, especially if it works differently in PvP as it does in PvE, so we're gonna have to wait for the final game and for people to test that rigorously. One of the more popular questions has been, how big is the world? That's hard to answer. I don't really know how to measure it. If you remember the map that they showed in one of their previews a while back, they showed Limgrave and the second area, which is called something of the lakes. Sorry, I forgot. If you take that picture of those two areas, then imagine the world being roughly twice that size just for the kind of overworld. That's roughly how big we are thinking. Of course, there is some underground areas and who knows, maybe we'll end up jumping onto the moon at the end of the game, I don't know. So if we're talking about square meters, I don't know. It seems pretty big to me. It won't compare to massive open worlds, but it doesn't need to. What they need to do is make sure this world is fun to explore, that it's densely populated with things to see, things to do. There's always something to catch your interest. And from my 6 hours with the game, I would say they have nailed that. Now, one thing I will tell you, if you want to see something very interesting, head to the Tower of Return in the Weeping Peninsula. You can head there as soon as you start the game pretty much too. And that about does it for now. I will have a full review out soon, I hope. And I look forward to seeing more of the Lands Between, maybe getting in some jolly cooperation with you guys. Thank you so much for watching, see you soon. And if you have questions for the final version for my review, leave them down below and I will strive to answer them in my full review.